Chapter 60, Entering the Palace. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Xiaoming Palace was 1,490.4 yards away from the south entrance of the royal palace in the western direction. It was 700 or so yards from the Weiyang Palace. How long would it take her to get to Weiyang Palace without alarming the guards in the palaces? And what chapter was the music in the Weiyang Palace up to? The southern ambassadors have definitely arrived and been seated already. The Ivy Festival was about to start and she should be able to catch its beginning later, but first she needed to know the reason. Luo thought about all these things and was silent. Coldness climbed up on her face and seemed to freeze up the entire palace. The good thing was that besides the one female servant, there were only two other people in the palace, Luo and the owner of this building. Therefore, no one would rebuke her for her impolite expression. Xiaoming Palace was the quietest and most luxurious palace in the royal palaces because the beloved and only daughter of the divine queen lived there. Princess Pinghua, the young girl who sat in the host spot, was pretty. She wasn't exactly matured yet, but her expression showed hints of amorousness. Facing the beloved Princess Pinghua of the Zhou dynasty, normal people wouldn't even dare to breathe heavily, but Luo's attitude didn't change. Her words were rather sharp. Pinghua, you deceived me and led me here to not participate in the Ivy Festival. Don't you want to tell me your reason? The female servant represented Princess Pinghua earlier and invited her to Xiaoming Palace. Little did she know that after arriving Xiaoming Palace, the female servant would keep on delaying her. When she realized what was happening, Princess Pinghua finally showed up. But a long time had already passed. She knew that Princess Pinghua did this because someone asked her to, and the reason would be related to the Ivy Festival. She only focused on the followers of the Divine Queen who was trying to bring the Tradition Academy down, but she never knew that their intention was always on Qinchangsheng. Hearing Luo's rebuke, Princess Pinghua didn't get angry. She smiled and said, "It's been a few months since we last saw each other. I heard you were pretending to be a nice student in the Tradition Academy and was a little curious. By the way, what kind of person is your master?" Luo didn't bother with her question and stared into her eyes while continuing her questioning. "Why? You knew I was close to you, so she wanted me to keep you busy for a while. But why that she didn't really tell me?" Princess Pinghua answered and her expression was rather calm. It seemed like it wasn't a big deal. But Luo saw the pretentiousness in her eyes. Many people knew that Princess Pinghua and Lady Mou wasn't exactly in a friendly relationship, but because of the Divine Queen, they kept a lively surface in the public's eyes. Luo obviously didn't trust her explanation entirely. Princess Pinghua said, "Just don't think about it too much. Mou was asked by my mother to host the last night of the Ivy Festival. What she cared about the most was the marriage proposal between that phoenix and that child of family of Qiu Shan. She told me to keep you here because she was afraid of you jumping out at the last second and interrupting their business." Since the princess's face was young, it was kind of strange of her to call Qiu Shanjun a child. Luo wasn't used to her expression and wrinkled her eyebrows slightly and said with disgust, "Talk normally. I'm not you, why would I interrupt anything?" Princess Pinghua's eyes lit up and said shyly, "Why would I interrupt anything? You sure do like to joke, Luo." Luo said, "Everyone who lived in the royal palace knew that. You don't like Su Yurong." Princess Pinghua's smile vanished from her face and said coldly, "Why do I have to like her just because my mother does? Besides, that child of Qiu Shanjun is perfect and outstanding. It would only be right for him to become the prince of Zhou dynasty. Why should he marry a dirty monkey like her?" Luo mocked lightly, "Even if you bring up that fight you lost against her when you guys were young, it wouldn't alter her status in the hearts of the Divine Queen or anyone. Talk less of Qiu Shanjun, even I would rather marry her and not you." Princess Pinghua was furious. "Which side are you on?" Luo said, "It's not like you never knew. I always liked her, of course, but if you let me leave, I can stand on your side." Princess Pingua stood up and looked at her quietly and then suddenly smiled. This is the first time that Mo seeked help from me. Do you think I will fail her? Luo Luo stood up and said, you never did anything that wouldn't be beneficial to you. Princess Pingua sighed, I'm a princess. I need to do something for Zhou dynasty. Luo Luo thought for a moment and realized what she was talking about. It should be related with tonight's proposal from the southern ambassadors, but she didn't understand why her appearance in the Ivy Festival would have an effect on it. Although Luo Luo respected Qiu Shanjun, she never had any thoughts about him. She raised her hands towards her belt. She could take out the whip of falling rain easily. The person who was standing in front of her was Princess Pingua of the Zhou dynasty. She was beloved by the divine queen. Even Luo Luo couldn't do much against her, but right now, Luo Luo grew a desire to kill her. She just realized that although the princess only dared to deceive and get her in Xiaoming Palace, Missouri, you could target her master. Princess Pingguo was familiar with her personality, but she wasn't afraid. She smiled and said, I heard that you handicapped my distant nephew on another night of the Ivy Festival. Good for you, Luo Luo, I can't defeat you. But if I'm harmed, can your family handle this? Luo Luo looked at her and said, the family of Tian Hai is crazy, we can't handle you guys. But you know as well that my family has a lot of crazy people too. If I got into any accident in the capital, can you and Mo handle it? Princess Pingua said innocently, this is the royal palace of Zhou dynasty, what could harm you? There were countless royal guests and Xiaxingists hidden around Xiaoming Palace in the night. Those people obviously wouldn't dare to harm Luo Luo, but they could circle and bind her in the palace. For same reason, Mo couldn't harm Qin Chongsheng, so she went out of her way to seal him in. Right now the master and the student were in a similar situation. Don't pretend to be naive, innocent, or pure in front of me. I'm also familiar with that. Luo Luo held the whip of falling rain and slowly drew it out and looked at the princess seriously, if I want to harm myself, who can stop me? Pinggua's expression turned serious because she felt Luo Luo's determination. If Luo Luo was actually hurt in Zhou Palace, then she and Mo wouldn't be able to handle the consequences afterward. The most important thing was that the queen didn't know about tonight's event. What could she do against the rage of the Crimson River of 800 miles? What's so good about that youngster named Qin Chongsheng? Why do you care about him so much? She looked at Luo Luo confusingly. This is not something you should care about, nor is it something you actually care about. Luo Luo lifted her right hand slightly and the whip was dragged across the floor. She looked at Princess Pingua and said, I don't care about your intentions. I just need you to command the people outside to make path for me. I need to go join the Ivy Festival now. Princess Pingguo was silent. Although she seemed to struggle inside, she was actually calculating the time silently. After making sure there was enough time for Mo to trap that youngster in Tong Palace, she then picked up her head and smiled. Sure, go ahead, she looked at Luo Luo, I hope you still can make it. Although the night was getting darker, the palace was still as bright as daylight. Luo Luo arrived at the outside of Wei Yang Palace. Her hairs were lifted slightly and there was sweat on her forehead. She glanced at the shadow in the back of the palace and saw Officer Jin and Li. She listened quietly for a moment and her eyebrows were lifted with rage. Qin Chongsheng wasn't in the palace. In the earlier moment, he was speaking with Yudong General, Su Shiji, then Prince Chen Lu spoke with him for a short while. Due to this reason, Officer Jin and Li couldn't approach him, but little did they know that in the next moment, he disappeared in the night and was nowhere to be found. Luo Luo glanced at the Zhou Royal Palace. There were countless buildings and gardens. She was silent. She knew how difficult a task like this would be. She had to find a person in such a vast area. What should she do next? Some people in the royal family didn't want her master or her to appear at the Ivy Festival because the southern ambassador was going to propose, but why is this? She squeezed the tiny bag in her sleeve and thought back to her master's words before they left the Tradition Academy. Her eyebrows lifted even higher. It seemed like they were about to take off and fly. Even though they didn't want her to do it, she will do it. Luo Luo didn't bother to think any further and pushed open the closed door of Wei Yang Palace. She headed for the light inside. Inside the palace, the southern ambassadors have already arrived and was greeting the students of the 6 Ivies and people of the government and the tradition. Some people who never met each other were introducing themselves. Everything seemed to be peaceful and lively. Just this moment, the palace door was pushed open. Although the cool night wind couldn't get in, the light inside the palace changed and the mood changed as well because the person who pushed open the door was impolite. After getting a good look on who the young girl standing near the palace door was, the entire building got quiet. Earlier some people noticed that there was no one sitting on the Tradition Academy's seats and were surprised. Now they finally saw the aforementioned girl. Luo Luo's eyes glared across the palace. That middle-aged man should be the head of the family of Qiu Shan Yuan Xian. That elder who had all gray hair should be the senior elder of Mountainly, Xiao Song Gong. That noble woman who wore a white gown and custom robe of the tradition should be related to the current virgin because she was sitting close to the female professors of the 13 divisions of green light. Those 3 expressionless young men who placed their swords on their knees should be the rumored 7 rules of heaven. She saw the young students of the other 6 Ivies and the ones who passed the semi-trial. There were a lot of people in the palace, but Chen Chongsheng wasn't there. Luo Luo's eyes finally stopped at the seat in front. That seat was very close to the main seats where Prince Chen Lu was sitting at. It was also very close to Qiu Shan Yuan Xian and Xiao Songgong's spot. A young man was sitting in that spot. That young man's expression was soft and kind. His aura was normal, but he was definitely a Xiexingist. BVEC there was a spark in his eyes. Luo Luo saw that person and knew he was Go Han Shi of the 7 rules of heaven. The well-praised Go Han Shi. Chapter 61, Let me speak one word to you. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The southern ambassadors arrived at the capital as guests. From a logical standpoint, they shouldn't ask actively, but that woman wearing the white gown was close to the teachers and was a student of the 13 division of green light. She knew Su Shiji as well. After seeing the weird atmosphere in the palace, she couldn't help but ask. Most of the people in the palace at the moment had participated in the first night of Ivy Festival and so, they all recognized the little girl who handicapped Tian Ji. Hearing the guest's question, someone answered, she's a student of Traditional Academy. For some reason, she arrived late. Hearing this answer, the woman from Mountain Virgin was a little surprised. The 3 young men who placed their swords on their knees all raised their head and glanced at Luo Luo. Their eyes were like sharp exquisite swords drawn from their sheaths. Even in the far south, people already knew Tradition Academy was in ruins. Earlier during their trip, they heard the incident that happened on the first night of Ivy Festival and then knew there were 2 new students added to the Tradition Academy. Is this young girl the genius that popped out of nowhere? Those 3 men from Mountainly were in the well-praised 7 rules of heaven. In their eyes, defeating Tian Ji wasn't an extraordinary feat, but since this girl is so young, she should be treated with respect. Go Han Shi also raised his head and looked at Luo Luo, but he only smiled warmly without showing much care. Luo Luo didn't bother with the 3 youngsters from Mountainly that glanced at her. Although the 7 rules of heaven were respectable, all her mind right now was on Go Han Shi. She sensed clearly that this person wasn't an easy figure. She herself wasn't his opponent, but what about her master? Can he defeat him? The entire palace was quiet for a moment. She was standing near the entrance and was actually out of place. Su Shiji said coldly, "It's already impolite for you to arrive late. Go sit down so you don't become a joke to our guests." Hearing this seemingly blunt comment, Prince Chen Lu was stumped, but then, he smiled and thought to himself, Su Shiji still haven't guessed this young girl's identity correctly. It seemed that the trust of the divine queen to him would be limited and far from Xing Chuan. Prince Chenlu glanced at the principal of Heavenly Academy, Mao Qiuyu. Right now, they were the only two who knew the true identity of Luo Luo in this palace. Seeing Mao Qiuyu's serious expression as if he didn't know anything, the prince thought of something and turned to glance at the bishop, Mei Li Sha. However, the bishop's eyes were half closed and seemed to have almost fallen asleep. The elders sure can endure the pressure. Prince Chenlu sighed. He knew that the bishop was hiding his wisdom. It was safe to say that he already guessed the identity of Luo Luo. Luo Luo looked at Su Shiji for a second. If it was any other time and someone yelled at her like this, she wouldn't endure such mockery or insult. She may be kind and nice in front of Qin Changsheng, but when she was acting out of rage, even Princess Pingguo was scared of her. But tonight's situation was different. Her hand was squeezing the tiny bag in her sleeve tightly and she thought about Qin Changsheng's previous words. She took a deep breath and pushed all of her rage down. She didn't talk with Su Shiji and walked straight to Tradition Academy's spot in the corner. Just this moment, music started playing and the curtain was lifted. Under the lead of dozens of servants, a woman luxuriously dressed slowly entered the palace. She was Lady Mou. Although her influence on the court was powerful, she didn't have a proper status on the surface. Speak logically, she should be more low-key in these kinds of events, but they are currently in the royal palace and everyone knew that she represented the divine queen. Therefore, they couldn't just sit quietly. Most of the people stood up and welcomed her. Several hundred people in the palace all stood up and the guests from the south didn't make an exception either. The crowd was like waves under the light of the nightly pearls. Only two people didn't stand up. One of them was the bishop of the Department of Education. The elder's eyes were closed and a faint smile was on his lips. It seemed like he was actually sleeping. The other one was Luo Luo in the corner. She stared straight into Mou's face in a moderately impolite fashion. Everyone in the field stood up except two people. Of course she was a bright spot and everyone looked at her. Su Shiji's face turned gloomier. Although he knew this young girl named Luo Luo had a powerful background, tonight was the night that the southern ambassadors will propose, which meant that he need everything under his control. This was the reason why he yelled at her previously. He needed to see if there would be any changing variables in this event. The changing variable seemed to be coming. The bishop's status was higher than him and so, Su Shiji couldn't express his anger towards him. He could only direct it to the last person remaining. He looked coldly at Tradition Academy's spot in the corner. Just like him, no one dared to look straight at the bishop who's sitting in the front. Everyone's eyes landed on Luo Luo. Their eyes turned low on Luo Luo since she was sitting. Luo Luo didn't even care or notice the eyes of others. She continued to stare at Mou. Her eyes were calm and her expression was serious. She was trying to warn her. Everyone's heart began to race. They didn't know what would happen next. Just when Su Shiji was ready to yell at her, a crispy voice was heard. "It's fine." Mou smiled and said. She extended her arms while her sleeves were lowered. She gestured everyone to sit. Her sentence seemed to direct everyone including Su Shiji to show her forgiveness to Luo Luo. But Luo Luo knew her sentence was directed to her. She promised Luo Luo that Qin Changsheng wouldn't be harmed. Luo Luo knew Mou wouldn't lie, especially at a critical moment like this. She knew that Mou did something and warned her. Although her heart relaxed a bit, her body didn't. She sat in the corner and quietly looked at Mou. Her eyes didn't turn an inch away. She was like a tiger hiding in the forest and looking at its prey silently. It could leap out at any time and rip its prey into pieces. Mou felt that pressure from the eyes in the far corner. She raised her eyebrows slightly because she was surprised. Her thought was the same as Princess Pinggua's. They thought that Luo Luo was only going to school at the Tradition Academy because she was bored of staying in the herb garden and was trying to play a game with an ordinary person. Even if Luo Luo was in any kind of relationship with Chen Changsheng, she shouldn't value him this much. Since Mo could feel the pressure from her eyes, other Xiaxingists in the palace also noticed it as well, especially people around the position of Tradition Academy. They suddenly felt a cold shiver go down their spine. Chen Changsheng thought he died, but he didn't. The black mighty dragon stopped in midair in front of him and didn't continue any further. The two were dozens of yards apart, but because the black dragon was gigantic, this distance was close. He could actually see the frost and snow on the dragon's teeth. The black dragon was breathing deeply and freezing wind was blowing. Countless snow and ice pieces were swirling around in the air. Chen Changsheng felt he was standing outside of Shuelao City in the far north. What made the black dragon stop wasn't his bravery nor the words he said before, it was the short sword in his hand. The seemingly ordinary short sword. Looking at the short sword in his hand, countless stars seemed to light up in the depths of the black dragon's eyes. Then, the stars were demolished. Every star was a different mood and feeling. Confusion. Misunderstanding. Surprise. Insecurity. Hatred. Separation. Encounter. Kindness. Caution. Rage. Generosity. Indifference. Compassion. Oblivion. Unforgettable. Disappointment. Helplessness. Hope. And there was hope. Countless emotions and expressions were shown in the cold eyes of the black dragon. It was hard to understand as a human why a single expression from the eyes could contain so much emotion. Chen Changsheng didn't understand. Snow was covering up his body but he still held the sword tightly. He looked at the black, mighty dragon silently. The black dragon looked at him quietly as well, for a long time. Suddenly, the black dragon let out a deep roar. The freezing wind started blowing violently. The ice and snow on the walls of the underworld started to collapse. They flew around in the air. That roar was a word because it contained a specific meaning. That deep roar seemed to be a simple sound, a single syllable. A short sound, yet complex one. It was like a storm, although it seemed to be violent and simple, countless streams and directions of wind were contained inside. This was the language of the dragons. This was the dragon language that disappeared in the human world for thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. Until this day, perhaps no one heard the dragon language, and people who spoke the dragon language that would be hard if not impossible to find. Dragons are the highest life form in the world. They have the most perfect body and soul. Only with the combination of their strong and complex living structure and their powerful spirit could they communicate like this. The most simple things are also the most complex. Is this the legendary language of dragons? Chen Changsheng was shocked. Even if he wasn't affected by the wind and snow, it is easy to imagine that he would still be frozen at this moment. He was actually shocked. His shock was different from anyone else's shock after hearing the words of a dragon. Or one could say his surprise was greater than anyone else's. He has heard this voice before. Back in the old temple of Xining village, he and his senior read all of the 3,000 scrolls of the way. The last scroll of them contained 1,601 words, and each word hinted the secret of this world. They didn't understand the words on the scroll, and so, they went to ask their master. Their master said he didn't understand as well but that he knew how to read them. That's why Chen Changsheng and his senior began to learn how to read those words. Although they didn't understand the meaning behind it, they knew how to pronounce them. He never knew what the strange words meant. Only until now, in the underground of Zhou Palace, in front of a mighty frost dragon, did he realize what the words were. Those words were the language of dragons. The last scroll of the 3,000 scrolls of the way was actually written in the language of dragons. Silence. A long period of silence. The black dragon looked quietly at Chen Chongsheng as if she was waiting for something. Chen Chongsheng didn't know what she was waiting for, and so, he stayed silent. The black dragon's eyes again lit up countless stars only to have them be put out moments later. The dragon stayed silent for a moment, then roared deeply. This roar was really deep. Freezing wind wasn't blowing, but a hint of death was contained inside. Chen Chongsheng's eyelashes were blown off. His Taoist hairstyle was blown off, his black hair was flowing behind him. It landed on the ground moments later. His shirt was blown out of his body and landed on the ground as well. The dragon's roar was deep. The end of fury was disappointing, and then hopeless. Chen Chongsheng knew he was about to die again, wasn't funny, it was sad. The black dragon seemed to have some sort of hope in him, which is why he let him live a while longer. But now those hopes were gone. Chen Chongsheng suddenly felt sad, but not because he was hopeless and not because of his approaching death. For some reason, hearing the deep roar of the black dragon made him extremely sad. It felt as if he saw countless years of endless loneliness. In the dark underground, deceived, cheated and guarded with hopelessness. He experienced those before as well. The shadow of death was like the darkness of night. It tortured him for years and never stopped for a second. He could tell no one and hide nowhere. He could only wait for the final judgment in loneliness. He suddenly wanted to comfort this black dragon. He didn't know what to say, he just felt he should say something in a situation like this. Therefore, he said one word to the black dragon. He didn't know the meaning of this word. It was the first word that he had learnt in the last scroll of the 3,000 scrolls of Wei when he was younger. It was a word with a single syllable, and its pronunciation was strange. That single word seemed to contain countless information. Hearing this word, the eyes of the black dragon started to shoot out millions of violent light rays. But the entire world fell into silence. Translator note. In the original text, the author was using a word pun, their eyes landed on luo luo, or in Chinese. In this case, landed and luo were the same characters in Chinese. However, I can't directly translate and fully express this pun, therefore I changed the context to, their eyes turned low on luo luo since she was sitting, in hopes that it will at least represent some effort of giving similarity of sound between lo and luo. Chapter 62, Ji Ji. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Silence, absolute silence, extremely long silence, no sound of wind, no sound of water dropping, no sound of breathing. Both the black dragon and Chen Chongsheng held their breath and remained wordless. These actions were probably due to nervousness which seemed to rise from the finally arriving hope. The black dragon's hope was unknown, but Chen Chongsheng's hope was obviously from escaping from death. When he saw the black dragon's whisker slowly float up, silently come to him and lightly touch the center of his eyebrows, he was not sure what would happen next. The place where this dragon's whiskers connected to its jaw was extremely thick and gradually got thinner further up. Its tip was about the same size as a human's little finger and it looked a bit sharp. Its surface was as dark as night and as transparent as jade. There was black light faintly rolling inside, like dark clouds. The tip of the dragon's whiskers barely touched the center of his eyebrows. The distance was so close that human eyes could not even tell if it touched or not. Chen Chongsheng felt more and more nervous. He was just back from the edge of death, so it was easy for him to feel fear. Lots of sweat came out of the hand he used to grab the handle. The sweat rapidly froze due to the low temperature. Quietly, the black whisker gently pointed at the center of his eyebrows. The feeling was very strange, not so terrifying, but rather slightly cool, which actually made his mind clear. It let him faintly understand what the black dragon meant. It wanted him keep going. Chen Chongsheng did not hesitate. He spoke the second word, still the word on the last scroll of the 3,000 scrolls of Wei. The pronunciation of this word was still very strange and it was extremely difficult for him to pronounce it. Even though his hand was covered with a layer of snow, it can be still seen that his face became red due to swelling and his mouth got pale from perhaps speaking out this word. It seemed to exhaust his spirit. The black dragon's whisker lightly moved. Its dark tip contracted and flipped in front of the center of his eyebrows. It then pointed at the center of his eyebrows again. Chen Chongqing knew, so he spoke the third word, then the fourth, then fifth. As the type of strange syllables came out of his mouth, his spirit swiftly became exhausted. It grew weaker and weaker. Simultaneously, he could feel the coldness in the surrounding gradually decrease. After speaking about 10 words, warmth came back to his inner organs again. The black dragon's look was still cold, but its whisker was contracting and flipping faster and faster, shining out countless black lines under the light emitting from the nightly pearl and eventually looking like an infinite amount of flowers blooming. The flowers symbolized its heart, which was very delighted now. Chen Chongqing felt its happiness, but some of his fear still remained. The approximately 10 syllables of dragon language, he said, was not following the order in the last scroll of the 3,000 scrolls of Wei, but randomly chosen from the 1,601 words. They shouldn't form a sentence, but this dragon actually understood it. He did so because he was a cautious person. He was not sure if he was right or wrong, but at least for now, there wasn't a problem. The black whisker gradually stopped moving, slowly got away from the center of his eyebrows and lightly touched his hand which was holding the sword. It did not show any animosity. Chen Chongqing received its signal and finally fully relaxed. The moment shrouded by the shadow of death finally passed. The terrifying pressure that stacked over a long time suddenly disappeared. His thinking changed as though the environment changed, the frost on his body fell off and dust which came from nowhere slipped through the gaps of the clothes and into the air. From the moment he pushed the door open, he was always extremely nervous. He only knew he saw a black dragon, but it wasn't until now did he get a chance to truly see the black dragon's appearance. It wasn't until now did he dare to look closely at the black dragon. This is a mighty frost dragon. Even among the dragon race, this was still the most noble being, one of the legendary holy creatures, at the same level with the mighty golden dragon and the true dragon above Cloud 9. Different from the mighty frost dragon described in myths and legends who loved violence, cleanliness and being as beautiful as the dark sky, Chen Chongqing saw a lot of dust on this black dragon and even a lot of broken dragon scales. Those dragon scales were half falling out. They looked very ugly, like the scales of dead fish. Chen Chongqing was very surprised. If the scrolls of Wei's descriptions of the mighty frost dragon was correct, then how could it look like this? As a youngster who had mysophobia, he clearly knew that it was impossible for a creature who cared about cleanliness so much to stand such a situation. What made him surprised was, as the coldness gradually decreased, he actually saw 2 very thick iron chains behind the black dragon. The 2 chains tightly locked the dragon's 2 claws in the back and deeply squeezed into the scales. It looked extremely terrifying. This black dragon actually wasn't the protector of the great Zhou royal palace, but a prisoner. The 2 chains, covered with thick layers of frost, was made of unknown materials. They showed no signs of breaking, which was logical. If they could lock a frost mighty dragon underground, it's definitely no ordinary chains. The other end of the 2 chains was at the wall. It was a stone wall around 100 zhang high, 3 zhang equals 10 meters. It decorated a huge image. The paint on the image already eroded over time, but what was left was still comprehensible. There wasn't any landscape, just 2 people. 2 scary-looking people. The wall was very tall and the picture was very big. The 2 people obviously also looked very tall and big, like gods. They were equipped with armor and weapons. One person held a mace and the other held a long whip. They were the gods. One of them was called Qin Zhong, the other was called Yugong. These 2 generals followed the first emperor for their life, from the establishment of the great Zhou dynasty until when the humans defeated demons at last. Although they were not as accomplished as Wang Jisoo, they were even more brave. Both were very strong as they got into saint stage when they were very young. They were the real elites who were rarely seen in the world. While they all were generals, they were much stronger than the generals of today. The chains that imprisoned the Black Dragon were held by the two generals in the picture. Such plot obviously had its own purpose. Seeing this image, Chen Chongqing faintly understood that this Black Dragon was probably caught in the period of the first emperor. He was thinking about the fantastic era, thinking about those elites who were almost becoming myths or had already become myths, and thinking about those images in the Lingyan pavilion. He really felt pity for this dragon. Maybe because of the humiliations and pressure from the demons, humans were incredibly strong at that era. Countless elites rose so that even creatures like the mighty frost dragon could be caught and held as pathetic prisoners. From the period of the first emperor to now, how many years had passed? In the cold, lonely, and dark underground, how did this Black Dragon insist to suffer for so long? You want to talk to me, right? Chen Chongqing asked. The Black Dragon's whisker floated up again and lightly touched his lip, like a dragonfly dip water. I just want to say, I don't understand the meaning of those words. Chen Chongqing looked at him and said, but, you can teach me. The Black Dragon's eyes suddenly became extraordinarily bright, even more bright than the sum of the thousands of nightly pearl. Chen Chongqing thought, unsurprisingly you could understand human language, then if you want to translate, I can learn the language of dragon race. He looked at the Black Dragon and continued, I know that the language of dragon race was very hard, but I am very good at learning. As long as you have the patience, I can definitely learn it. Suddenly, the Black Dragon made a deep shout. Chen Chongqing was dumbfounded. The Black Dragon's whisker rose without making any wind current, and it pointed 4 times at the center of his eyebrows as fast as lightning and as light as dust. Chen Chongqing frowned, thinking about the meaning. The Black Dragon lightly pointed at the same place again for 4 times, and simultaneously the dragon made a deep shout. Chen Chongqing understood now. In the previous sentence, he said 4 eyes, this is what the Black Dragon attempted to tell him. Chen Chongqing pointed at himself and asked. The dragon language was very complicated. Countless segments of one syllable could be rearranged into an infinite number of permutations. Different combinations were expressions of different meanings. If he wanted to fully learn it, it would be a very long process. He knew that the dragon's roar had the meaning, but definitely not just, but at least it had, I. Looking at Chen Chongqing's action, the Black Dragon was first dazed and then suddenly, it began to roll. Its huge body was constantly rolling in the underground dimension, forming a terrifying hurricane. At the same time, a strange sound kept coming up from the Black Dragon's mouth. From approximately 1,000 years ago to now, it had never been so happy before. It did not know what kind of roar it should use to celebrate. Yet because of some reasons, it must suppress its roar and its laugh. In Chinese, both roar and laugh were pronounced xiao, so author is making a pun here. Gg. It sounded like a mouse shouting. The noise was very funny. Yet there was extreme happiness inside. Chen Chongqing did not know what the Black Dragon did before to be imprisoned by the great Zhou dynasty. Now he saw it feel happy simply because there was a human doing the simplest communication with it. Chen Chongqing felt touched, and pitied it greatly. Not sure how much time had passed, but the Black Dragon finally stopped rolling, and calmed down. It looked at Chen Chongqing and felt his honest sympathy. Its look gradually got kind. Its whisker floated up again and paused in the air between his eyebrows. It waited for Chen Chongqing to open his mouth again. Chen Chongqing thought a bit and spoke something that the Black Dragon didn't want to hear. I know you really want to speak to someone, but now I can't do it. I have a very important thing that I need to leave right away. The Black Dragon's look became cold again. Chen Chongqing said seriously, I promise you, as soon as I finish this thing, I will come back to find you, learn language with you, and talk to you. The black dragon's look was still cold, and even somewhat doubtful. As a noble mighty frost dragon imprisoned by human for so many years, it would never forget what its father said before. If humans are trustworthy, then we should be the rulers of this world. Chapter 63, Coincidence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The black dragon thought, humans are all shameless liars. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to suffer for so long in this place. Just because I'm black, doesn't mean I like darkness. In the very beginning, the nights were truly dark, Mom. Wait, no, what am I thinking? Okay, the youngster looks very honest and smells very nice. He doesn't look like a liar. He's just like the man whose last name was Wong back then. However, I am not even sure if the man's words were real or not. Why should I trust this youngster? After I let you leave, you definitely won't come back anymore. What do you mean by finishing your thing and then coming back to chat with me? You think I really didn't see that? You were also fooled by someone to come here. Why would you come back after escaping? Also, on top of this place is the royal court. You think you can come back as long as you want. You are just trying to comfort me. No, you are lying to me. Yes, all humans are liars, you are all liars. I suffered in this underground dimension by myself for so long. Never saw a living creature beside that terrifying woman couldn't be counted as human. I would rather not see her. Finally, I met someone who could speak to. How could I let you leave? If you leave, then my day will be gloomy again. I understand your feelings and your uneasiness, but you should believe in me. Chen Chongsheng looked at it and said. The black dragon's look was cold but also moderately doubtful, as if it wanted to say, you are only a bit older than 10-year-olds. How would you know the suffering I faced all this time? I really know. Although I definitely didn't suffer as long as you did, it's just like I said in the beginning, I am unfortunate too. Fine, I know you can hardly believe in me, but it's just like a gamble. You let me go, I probably will keep my promise and try to find a way to come back later. If you kill me now, I think there will be small chance of you seeing anyone in front of you again. No matter what, you should take the gamble. Chen Chongsheng looked at it, said frankly and seriously, this is your best choice. The black dragon remained silent. Suddenly, it looked up at the top with its eyes falling between the thousands of nightly pearls. In the Weiyang Palace, the Ivy Festival was continuing, or rather, it already ended. The test on literature that should have been held last night was moved to a later date. Even so, no one cared about its result. How could the competition between the 6 Ivies be more interesting than the great thing that was going to happen later? Everyone was reserved and kind because what was going to happen next was a good thing, marriage. Even Guan Fei Bai from the Li Mountain, the most arrogant and cold 4th ruling of the 7 rulings, was also laughing now because he knew this was a very important thing to his oldest senior. It was also a very important thing to his sect and the entire South. Most importantly, even the thought that his oldest senior could marry Junior Su, was a thing that he should feel proud of and celebrate. The elder of Li Mountain Xiao Songgong already stood up and was speaking something. The southern ambassadors were officially proposing the marriage to the great Zhou dynasty. Now that the process was started already, it just needed a few more steps and this marriage that was wanted by the entire world would turn real. The bishop closed his eyes like he was about to fall asleep. Prince Chenlu was smiling mildly and was speaking with Xiao Songgong. Mou was calm as she looked into the darkness outside of the palace. Luo looked at these people with her right hand tightly holding onto the pack. She decided to open it. Another long time of silence. The underground dimension was like a graveyard. Chen Chongsheng looked at the black dragon and waited nervously for its decision. The black dragon glimpsed at him and suddenly slowly flew backward. The light of thousands of nightly pearls went out at the same time. Only some light remained. They shone on the front half of the black dragon. The dragon gradually disappeared in the darkness. Chen Changsheng understood its glimpse. It wanted him to remember his promise and to visit here frequently. Going to the royal palace was very difficult already. He had to pass through Tong Palace and then walk deep into the underground. After doing so, he would be able to finally see it again. He didn't hesitate. He nodded to the dragon. He felt very thankful to this black dragon. He wanted to something at last. Although it understood the human language, Chen Changsheng didn't know how to call it. Master. He already had one. Elder. This didn't sound close. You. Too disrespectful. Yo. Does he want to die? These all seemed inappropriate. Chen Changsheng thought for a while and shouted to the black dragon that was gradually disappearing in darkness, "Big Uncle, Dragon." The black dragon was a bit dumbfounded from the title it was given. Big Uncle Dragon. Chen Changsheng did not know what he should say. Saying thank you without doing any actions wouldn't help. He suddenly remembered a thing. He pointed at the roof, said, "I have to take the nightly pearl with me." The black dragon roared and looked very angry. It did not think that after all that, this little kid would want more than he already got. Chen Changsheng insisted and said, "Big Uncle, that belongs to a little girl. I have to return to her later on." There was an extremely tiny pond in a remote palace in the royal court. As the night got darker, the lights inside the palace turned already off. A middle-aged woman was standing next to the pond. Her appearance was pretty common and her dress was also very simple. Obviously, she wasn't one of those imperial concubines who only spent time in dresses and makeup. Neither of the maids were at their youth. She stood by the pond. It was unsure if she was preparing to wash her hands, or was washing clothes. At this moment, hua hua sounds, water flushed up like an upside-down waterfall. A young man was flushed out. He was Chen Changsheng. In the underground dimension, his clothes was covered fully by a layer of frost. Now it was all flushed away by water. He was all wet and he looked extremely poor. How would this middle-aged woman expect a man to suddenly appear in the dark night? She was startled by it. She took a step back. The lady wore wooden shoes. The step she took backwards was on the rock next to the pond. Pa! There was a squirrel eating in the forest. It was scared by this sound. It threw away the fruit that it carried with its 2 forelegs, jumped from the tree to the handrail on the second floor of the palace and ran swiftly towards the direction to the exit of the yard. Its tail moved randomly and it coincidentally touched a pot of flour that was placed at the handrail. The flour leaned slightly and was about to fall down. Coincidentally, the mid-aged lady stood under it. If the pot fell down, it would definitely hit her. At the very least, she might get hurt. Chen Changsheng left the underground dimension, came back to land and then fell back into the pond. His face was wet. After he wiped off the water, and could see things, the first image he saw was this extremely coincidental, extremely unfortunately scene. He did not even think and he immediately threw himself against the middle-aged woman. He knew that here was deep in the royal court. There were countless elites. If those people heard anything, then it would probably be very hard for him to return to the Wei Yang Palace. Yet he still went for it. Not because he was afraid the pot would fall on the ground and let others know, but because the middle-aged lady was in danger. If he thought closely, he might have made a better choice. The better choice of how to leave, and then arrive at the Wei Yang Palace promptly, but he didn't think. He embraced the middle-aged lady in his arms and rolled a half circle. If the flower pot fell down, it would only fall on his back. But the pot didn't drop. So, this image became a little embarrassing and hard to explain. There was sound as he expected, but there was no pain coming from his back. Chen Changsheng looked up at the handrail to see that the pot was still there. He obviously didn't see, but the middle-aged lady took back one finger. Chen Chongsheng looked at the middle-aged woman and felt a bit nervous. If she shouts out now, then he would be even more troubled. At such late night, embraced by a youngster came out of pond, anyone would probably yell. At this time, he should knock out the lady right away, just like what goes on in novels. But there was another problem. He didn't know how to knock people out. So, he faced a very complicated issue. The palace in dark night, the wave in the pond and the flower pot on the handrail were staring at each other. He and the middle-aged lady were staring at each other. Hard to comment. Silent and wordless. He was a young man. She was a mid-aged woman. There wasn't any embarrassment related to gender. There's only embarrassment. The middle-aged lady frowned. She opened her mouth to say something but decided against it and closed her mouth again. Chen Chongsheng felt surprised. He thought, what? It can't be. He let go his hand, gave a salute to apologize, and then used his hands to expertly make gestures. The middle-aged woman looked at him and made a gesture too. Chen Chongsheng thought, that's why. He then made a gesture to apologize again and saw that she did not have any intention to account him for fault. He didn't understand why, but since he didn't have much time, without thinking too much, he left urgently. Dragon language, sign language, he knows a lot. Looking at Chen Chongsheng's back that was disappearing in darkness, the middle-aged lady smiled and said. Chen Chongsheng had thought that she was mute. She said to the darkness, Weiyang Palace is too far, go help him out. He's truly a good kid. The middle-aged woman gradually stopped smiling and said indifferently, if his last name is Chen, that will be even better. After saying this, she turned and walked towards the palace. The previously dark and seemingly deserted palace suddenly lit up. Several dozens of eunuchs and maids, with many royal guests, kneeled down at the sides. No one dared to look up. All held their breaths. Chapter 64, Questioning the World. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There were tons of people kneeling on the floor in the side palace. They were like the surface of a calm ocean. As the middle-aged woman walked by, the ocean was split and it induced a wave. A servant leader coughed 2 times and the other servants on the floor kneeling all stood up hastily and left the palace without a sound. That servant leader had wrinkles all over his face which represented his old age. He carefully lifted that middle-aged woman's hand and said quietly and respectfully, even if that youngster's background has some problems, why is the queen so bothered? That middle-aged woman was the divine queen. Hearing the question of the servant, she said without expression, if he's just an ordinary person, then obviously I don't need to bother with him. The servant leader knew that ordinary meant if the youngster could shoshing or not. He thought deeply for a moment and said, I checked that recommendation letter. There is no problem with it. The Pope gifted it to Lady Mou and Princess Pingguo back in the day. From messages of Palacely, the Pope has nothing to do with this. The youngster was dragged into this trouble by accident. Although his marriage vow with Palace Su, General's mansion, was surprising, I can't really see anything special about him. The divine queen stopped walking and glanced at the darkness behind the side palace. She was silent for a moment and asked, have you ever seen a person not afraid of death? The servant leader knew this question of the divine queen contained a deeper meaning, so he started thinking seriously. People all say the heroes of this world treated life and death lightly, but only the people who experienced countless times of struggle between life and death understand that their fearlessness was a result of their unbreakable will which overcame the fear. Their fear of death always existed in their hearts. This servant leader lived in the Zhou Palace for several hundred years and had a great influence in the politics. 20 years ago, after the last emperor passed away, all of the royal family disagreed with the divine queen ascending the throne and tried to rebel. The queen easily put down the rebellion. It wasn't only due to the strong and clear support from the Pope, but also because this servant leader played a major role. He was a character who experienced countless departure between life and death. He's more than sure that no one was not afraid of death. Even a great man like the first emperor was still not calm in his deathbed. He stared at the stars in the night sky and the only expression in his eyes were fear and sadness. He was beside the emperor that time. He saw that view clearly. No one is not afraid of death, he answered. Then in the precise moment earlier, that youngster was actually not afraid of death. He's not a normal person. The divine queen thought back to the words the youngster said in front of the black mighty dragon. I always thought only the child from family of Qiu Shan could pair with that girl, but now that I'm not quite sure. The leader's servant was a little shocked. He thought to himself, will the queen change her attitude about this entire event? The side palace fell into a silence again. The night wind blew through the flower pot outside of the hallway lightly. The stems in the pot shook slightly and the squirrels ran faster on the tree branches far away in the woods. Tonight's the night of Qi Shi. It will be lively outside the palace. I'm thinking about going out to see the view. Queen, that I thought you were going to wait in the palace for the result of the Ivy Festival. Waiting for what? Which student of what academy is the best? I'm not interested. The leader's servant was confused. Don't you want to know if this proposal will be successful or not? The divine queen said, whether the general's mansion will marry with the family of Qiu Shan or complete its promise of taking Chen Chongsheng for its son. In law is not something they can decide. The servant leader bowed and said, everything in the world follows the will of the queen. The divine queen said calmly, you are wrong again. This event is not something I can decide either. The leader's servant was a little shocked. He thought, who else besides you could decide the result of this marriage? The person who is going to marry is you wrong. Then whoever she will marry to should depend on her attitude. The divine queen said, that girl has her own thoughts. No matter what other people do is meaningless. It will all be a joke. There is a street outside of the south of Royal Palace. It's a little from other places which were filled with lamps and lights of Qi Shi. This place was isolated and quiet. Perhaps it's close to the royal palace. Perhaps a lot of ice was transported out of this place, and the streets were filled with leftover cold water. No one was willing to set up their shops here. This place is named Bridge Bay Xian, but there are no bridges here. Or more precisely, that bridge made out of green stone is fake. River Luo circled around the royal palace but went around this place. Not a single water drop was beneath this bridge. Not too far from the Bridge Bay Xian was a well. The temperature inside the well was freezing, as if the inside wasn't water but rather unmeltable ice. It's already deep into the night and the light of the royal palace couldn't get to here. The willow branches were like brushes filled with ink as they dipped lightly around the well. The divine queen stood inside the well and in her hand held a nightly pearl she picked up in the platform of dew. She opened her hand above the well and the nightly pearl lit up the walls of well and fell rapidly. Gradually, it was devoured by the darkness of the well. A while passed and a sound was heard from the bottom of the well. Perhaps due to the well's height, the sound wasn't loud, but rather it was like the echo of water hitting the walls of the well. She knew that it was not the sound of hitting water but an angry roar of the black dragon. The black dragon was furious because it felt that humans have deceived it again. She promised to give a nightly pearl, but that youngster took one. Therefore she should give it 2 nightly pearls instead of 1. Even if it couldn't challenge her, she shouldn't bully it like this. The divine queen was a little unhappy. You brute, that nightly pearl was his. Did your elder dragon not teach you math when you were young? Chen Chongsheng's skill of mathematics was good. Or more precisely, he was good with anything related with knowledge. But his sense of direction wasn't the best. After leaving his previous location and entering the royal palace, he quickly realized that he was lost. The stars were above him and lamps were in front of him. He knew where the north was and therefore knew where the south was. He could even faintly see the lamp lights emitted from the Weiyang Palace. However, There are tons of trees in the royal palace and the roads were twisting and turning everywhere. He was afraid to encounter any guards and so, he didn't walk on the main roads. Now he was confused of where to go to get to his destination. Next moment, a light noise was heard from a garden. A black goat walked out of the darkness of night silently as if it was a part of the darkness. Back in the Tradition Academy, Chen Chongqing saw it. Earlier outside of Wei Yang Palace, Chen Chongqing encountered it as well. For some mysterious reason, he was sure that this black goat was friendly to him. He thought for a moment and said, "You want to help me?" That black goat looked quietly at him for one peek and turned around and walked into the night. Chen Chongqing didn't dare delay. He quickly followed and looked at the southern Wei Yang Palace before he left. That place was still filled with light but the music stopped. Where in the process of proposal were the southern ambassadors up to? Will he get there in time? The Ivy Festival was already halfway done. The southern ambassadors started to propose officially. There were many big characters in the Wei Yang Palace such as the Elder of Mountainly, Xiao Song Gong, that woman from Mountain Virgin, the principal of Heavenly Academy Mao Qiuyu, Su Shiji, Prince Chen Lu and Mou. In the process of proposal, they represented different roles. There were witnesses, there were custom observers, and there were acknowledgers. The beautiful dances on the platform have just stopped. Although the food was getting cold, no one continued eating. People smiled and looked up at the platform. The leader of family of Qiu Shan stood up and greeted. Mou represented the divine queen and thanked him. She represented the Zhou dynasty and was happy to see the success of this marriage and wished that humans would be bound closer together because of this marriage. She thought this would lead to the success of fighting against the demon race. That woman from Mountain Virgin was the aunt of teaching of Su Yu Rong. She represented the Virgin of Southern sect and agreed to this marriage. Su Shiji was next, he greeted and welcomed the southern guest and showed his approval. What is a official and successfully proposal? The proposal is the beginning, approval is the custom, the vow is the proof. This made up a successful proposal. The heaven, the earth, the ruler, the parent, then the master. Right now, the divine queen has approved this marriage, Su Shiji approved this marriage, and the Virgin of South sect has approved this marriage. The heaven and earth were silent. Currently the ruler, parent, and master all agreed to this marriage. Everyone thought this proposal was successful but no one thought about the attitude of Su Yu Rong toward her own marriage. Of course, no one also thought Su Yu Rong would object to this herself. As the most famous and glorious pair of young man and young woman, the marriage between Su Yu Rong and Qiu Shanjun was treated as a destined action by everyone. The stories between them were told all over the world and everyone thought it would be a story with a happy ending. Coming up next would be the last questioning of the 3 questions in the proposal process. The customs of the Zhou dynasty weren't complicated. It mainly originated from the literature of the tradition. As the tradition grew, Zhou customs spread to the south. Today, the southern ambassador's proposal followed Zhou custom entirely. It wasn't entirely respecting the female say of the family, but their customs were the same. The aforementioned 3 questions were questioning the heaven and earth, questioning the family, and questioning the ruler and master. They are asking for the approval from these people. The last question was questioning the world. The reason for the 3 questions in Zhou custom, especially for the last one, it seemed, was to give a chance for the people to point out a problem between the bride and groom. However, a disagreement rarely occurs. It was more of a chance for the bride or groom to back out in the marriage. Under normal circumstances, no one would question or disagree in the proposal process. Doing so would trouble both the male and female side of the family. It was clear that both sides of the family were sure about this marriage and so, the last questioning the world was just to follow the customs. Prince Chen Lu stood in front of the platform and looked at the several hundred people in the palace. He smiled and asked, Qiu Shanjun desires to become the husband of Su Yu Rong, does anyone object? The palace was silent, but the mood wasn't oppression. Everyone's faces were filled with smiles. In a beautiful moment like this, people only wanted a blessing. They just want to congratulate both sides of the marriage after the questioning of Prince Chen. In the corner at the Seats of Tradition Academy, there was no smile on Luo's face. It was pale due to extreme shock. She has already opened the tiny bag in her sleeve and saw the marriage vow. Only until she saw the two names on the marriage vow did she know that her joke that day was actually true. Now she knew what the trouble between her master and Dong Yu General's mansion was. Now she knew why Mou and other people went out of their way to take her master out of the field. Questioning the world is asked 3 times. Prince Chen smiled warmly and asked again, anyone object? The palace was still quiet and people's faces were filled with blessing smiles. The world was beautiful. Prince Chen looked at Su Shiji and smiled to congratulate. Su Shiji rubbed his beard lightly and nodded. Prince Chen glanced at leader of family of Qiu Shan and smiled while nodding. Head of family of Qiu Shan smiled without speaking, it was clear that he was in joy. Prince Chen glanced at the people and asked one last time, anyone object? The entire world agreed to this marriage, no one objected. Therefore, the entire world was happy. Everyone was waiting. In the corner, Luo suddenly stood up. But no one noticed her. Because at this moment, a voice was heard outside of the palace. I object. A youngster entered the palace from the door. He was wet, his black hair was untied and his shirt was in pieces. He looked at the people in the palace. His eyes were bright and his expression was still. The palace fell into a silence. Chapter 65, She is my fiancée. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Without intentionally raising the volume and without intentionally bringing emotion, the voice was very calm. It was as if he was saying an insignificant sentence that was heard very clear. The 2 words were so clear, that people inside the palace couldn't even convince themselves they heard wrong. Therefore, the 2 words caused the entire Wei Yang palace to calm down. The previous hopeful calmness was replaced with silence. The atmosphere was extremely strange. In the next second, the calm silence broke as the place became noisy. Innumerate voices were about to break the roof of the palace. Someone's against it. There's actually someone against this marriage. Deep in the palace, Su Shiji suddenly stood up and looked at Chen Changsheng who stood by the door. His face looked extremely pale. Prince Chen felt slightly dazed but did not know what happened. Mou also slowly stood up expressionless, but coldness gradually creeped onto her face. The reaction from the southern ambassadors was obviously much more bewildered. The master of the Qiu Shang family stared at the young man standing by the door. He didn't recognize him, and forced himself to take a few deep breaths to suppress his anger. But among the ambassadors, some were youngsters who were to participate in the great trial next year. They could not hold their anger like their master, especially the 3 rulings of the Li Mountain. The youngsters became extremely cold and looked at Chen Changsheng as if they were looking at a dead man. Qiu Shanjun was their most respected senior. They knew how much their oldest senior cared about this marriage and knew how much their oldest senior cared about Suyu Rong, but just when they were about to see the couple finally come together and when their oldest senior's dream was about to reach, there was actually someone who dared to disrupt them. Was he trying to commit suicide? If they were not at the palace, the 3 young elites would probably have already waved their swords and killed Chen Changsheng, but after all, this place was the great Zhou royal palace. As southerners, they had to hold it in for now and wait for the Zhou people to take action first. The action came very fast, Su Shiji's face filled with emotions. He stared at Chen Changsheng and shouted coldly, "Trash! How dare you make any noise in the palace? Soldiers, come kick this person out." After being deployed back to the capital, Su Shiji and Xue Xingchuan were in charge of the defense of the royal palace together due to the trust of the divine queen. Because of this, the soldiers inside the royal palace were all his own subordinates. Upon hearing his shout, all 10 soldiers surrounded Qin Changsheng. Su Shiji stared at Qin Changsheng. His look was very unkind, filled with caution, and held killing intent. He wouldn't give Qin Changsheng any chance to speak. If he had to, he would command the soldiers to kill Qin Changsheng without letting him speak. Many people noticed his intention, but they didn't know the reason behind his actions. Because he was Su Yurong's father, they thought that if anyone wanted to disrupt their daughter's marriage banquet, they would also want to kill the disruptor. The soldiers did not catch Qin Changsheng, because someone stood in front of him. Luo Luo left the seats for the Tradition Academy. She held the falling rain whip and didn't even look at the soldiers. Her vision directly fell on Mou, who was deep in the palace. Next, another person stood in front of Qin Changsheng. Tang 36. Previously, after Qin Changsheng and Luo Luo left the palace, Tang 36 arrived at the Weiyang Palace, so he didn't see the two. He paid all of his attention to Guan Fei Bai, the 4th ruling of the 7 rulings. Later Luo Luo came back to the Weiyang Palace, but he still didn't see Qin Changsheng. He then began to feel a little strange. He didn't know why Qin Changsheng was against the engagement between Su Mansion and Qiu Shan family, but he knew there was hostility between Qin Changsheng and the Su Mansion. He was also too lazy to think about those problems, and since there were people that wanted to kill Qin Changsheng, he obviously had to stand up. Su Shiji's face was completely covered with emotions now. He looked at Luo Luo and Tang 36, who stood in front of Qin Changsheng. I don't care who you are or what your background is, tonight I, as the general, has the responsibility to catch this criminal. If anyone dares to hinder, don't blame me for being ruthless. I wouldn't go easy. Criminal. An old voice suddenly came up next to Su Shiji, sounding blank. The person who was speaking is the bishop of the Department of Traditional Education. The elder who just opened up his eyes was certainly very blank, like he just woke up. He looked around and then asked Su Shiji, "Where's the criminal?" He knew the answer but still asked, which made Su Shiji's face become covered with anger. The bishop followed everyone's vision and looked towards the door and saw Qin Changsheng. As if he just realized, he said, "This little kid is a student of the Tradition Academy, I signed the paper myself. It shouldn't be wrong. Even though he's late, he shouldn't be counted as a criminal, right?" The soldiers looked towards Su Shiji. Su Shiji got even more angry, but he eventually confirmed the bishop's position. Prince Chen Lu, feeling a bit helpless, explained to the bishop, previously he spoke against the engagement. Bishop looked at the people, smiled and said, "Since there's a part called questioning the world, then obviously it should allow for people to disagree. If it doesn't, then why would Prince ask before? If there's no respect for the rule, then you can make the engagement as you want to. Why would you come to the Great Zhou to propose?" Logically, his words couldn't be argued against. So the southern ambassadors got even more furious. Many looked angrily at the bishop, but the elder closed up his eyes again as if he wanted to continue sleeping. He completely did not care about these looks that were as sharp as swords and as cold as snow. The bishop kept closing eyes. What he said set the trend of this thing. At least viewing from the surface, it represented the tradition's attitude. There weren't many people who could question his words. Mou obviously was one of them, but she didn't do anything. She slowly sat back at her seat. She looked a bit surprised, because she noticed before that when Qin Changsheng walked into the palace, a black goat disappeared in the darkness simultaneously. She obviously knew what this black goat represented. The black goat carried Qin Changsheng to the Weiyang Palace. What did this represent? Prince Chen Lu didn't expect her to remain silent and felt a little surprised. At this moment, the elder of Li Mountain, Xiao Songgong, stood up and said, "Prince, what's happening?" The marriage between Su Yurong and Qiu Shanjun was not as simple as a connection through marriage between Dong Yu General's mansion and the Qiu Shan family. Before tonight, the court and the various forces in the south definitely had discussed many times until they eventually settled that the southern ambassadors would come to propose. The so-called proposal was simply a showing of respect to the courtesy and rules. It was just a definite procedure. No one expected such accidents to happen. Xiao Songgong's questioning obviously had its own reasons. Since this was at the royal palace, since both sides already settled the negotiation beforehand, then the Zhou people obviously had to explain. Prince Qianlu smiled bitterly and didn't say a word, thinking that Divine Queen was simply making me come to host the event tonight. He didn't say anything. You guys asked me to explain, who should I go ask? The bishop closed his eyes. Mao Qiu put his head down and was drinking wine. These elders so mean for giving him the responsibility to explain the situation. After thinking for so long, he thought he only could ask Chen Chongsheng himself, what is happening? Prince Qianlu looked at Chen Chongsheng and spread out his hands. He appeared very innocent. From this detail, it could be seen that he certainly kept some kindness for Chen Chongsheng. He otherwise wouldn't let him explain first. Previously outside the palace, I heard Prince ask if there was anyone against the marriage between Qiu Shanjun and Su Yurong. Spoken to this point, Chen Chongsheng paused a bit and then continued, so I said, I object. This answer was not an answer, but a repetition. He did not emphasize his tone, but the two words came up again. It caused the aura in the palace to be even more depressed. His attitude was very clear. I object Su Yurong's marriage to Qiu Shanjun. Why do you object? Why can you object? Two voices came up at the same time in palace. One of them came from Prince Qianlu. He frowned, felt a little confused, and felt a little worried. The other one came from Elder Xiao Songgong. He raised his eyebrows and looked extremely angry. His attitude was tough. These two problems were also the problems that everyone wanted to ask. Su Yurong had the phoenix bloodline. Qiu Shanjun had the dragon bloodline. Both possessed ability and potential that were rare to be seen even in 1,000 years. They were seen by the human world as candidates of leaders to fight the demons. They both Xiuxing and study in the south, belonged to the same sect, lived together, and could be counted as childhood sweethearts. Moreover, this marriage was extremely important to the union of the southern and northern sections. Anyway, there were many reasons that they should stay together, yet they couldn't find any reason why they shouldn't stay together. What is the godly companion? In people's eyes, these two were godly companions to each other. This entirely wet, poor-looking youngster actually dared to object this marriage. Why did he? Why could he? Chen Chongsheng just used one sentence to answer the two questions at the same time. I have an engagement with Su Yurong. He said, she is my fiancée, so obviously, she can't marry others. The palace was deadly silent again. Engagement. He said Su Yurong was his fiancée. Nonsense. People were all shocked. They looked at Chen Chongsheng and could not say a word. They did not dare to believe at all and thought that this must be fake. Su Shiji looked at Chen Chongsheng. His face was pale and his two hands slightly trembled. He said it. This kid actually finally said it. He felt very regretful. In the very beginning, he should have killed him, destroyed him into dust and have thrown it into the Luo River. After tonight, the Dongyu general's mansion would become a joke. The southern ambassadors were just as angry as Su Shiji, but they didn't believe in what Chen Chongsheng just said. They simply thought that this youngster was ordered by a party to disrupt the marriage on purpose. This action humiliated the Li Mountain Sword sect and even the entire southern sections. The master of the Qiu Shan family got extremely mad, the female disciples of the Mountain Virgin all frowned and didn't say a word. The youngsters of the Li Mountain Sword sect were all angry. Guan Fei Bai's expression even appeared pale due to extreme anger. His right hand already held to the handle. How dare you? Where did this shameless villain come from? How dare he humiliate the mountainly? Xiao Songgong suddenly turned, looked at Mou and said, "Why don't you kick him out right now? What are you Zhou people doing here? How can that youngster be Su Yurong's fiancé?" Many people then realized, all stood up angrily, and started scolding Qin Changsheng. Chapter 66, The White Crane as Proof, Part 1, You are listening at novelfull.audio. Why are you so sure that my words are false? Qin Changsheng looked at the people in the palace and asked. His expression was serious because he was really angry. I never heard from my niece Yurong that she has a fiancé like you. The woman wearing the white gown stood up slowly and looked at him. She saw the angry expression of the youngster and was a little nervous. She thought back to her senior's actions these months. Perhaps what this youngster said were true. What's your proof? Qin Changsheng answered, I have the marriage vow. Xiao Songgong's face was cold and he yelled sharply, no one will believe you even if you take out the book as proof. I believe him. A crispy voice was heard in the palace. The voice was like two pearls hitting each other. It was beautiful but firm. Luo scoffed, my master is more than qualified to marry anyone. The palace was filled with silence. People were shocked and had no words to say. They thought to themselves, does this little girl from Tradition Academy know what she's saying? That youngster is her master. Isn't he just a garbage that couldn't even reach the purification stage? How come in her words, Su Yurong should be proud of marrying him? Is he more outstanding than Qiu Shanjun? Luo didn't care what other people thought. She looked at Qin Changsheng admiringly and said, Master, you are the best. I also believe him. Tang 36 glanced around the people of the palace and said, this guy is the real deal. No matter what he did I wouldn't be surprised, speak less of him being the fiancé of Su Yungrong. Even if he said he was the son of Demon Emperor, I would believe him as well. Zhuang Huanyu saw the expressions of the southern ambassador faces and wrinkled his eyebrows slightly and yelled, stop talking. Tang 36's face turned cold and didn't bother with him. He looked at Qin Changsheng and said, no wonder you are prouder of yourself than me. You have a fiancé like this. You should be proud of this thing. I admire you. Luo and Tang 36 spoke from their heart. They actually admired Qin Changsheng. But in the eyes of the southern ambassadors, they were belittling them when they supported Qin Changsheng. The elder, Xiao Songgong yelled furiously, Mountain Li is the leader of the south and praised by the people of this world. When the first emperor established this kingdom, he decorated a title for us. Taizong Emperor even praised Mountain Li as the master of all people. Right now the divine queen who is in power respects Mountain Li. I never thought I would see the day. A young child wants to destroy the 7,000 years of fame of my sect tonight. If Zhou government doesn't take care of these young fellows here, I will take care of them myself. Although he was not the only elder of Mountain Li's sword sect, but he was of an old generation and his Shoshing stage was extremely high as well, just one more step to enter the saint stage. In tonight's Weiyang Palace, he and Principal of Heavenly Academy, Mao Qiuyu, were the strongest too. Right now in his rage, his aura was released. Green light emitted faintly from his thin face and a powerful pressure bursted out of his thin body. It skipped more than 10 yards of distance and arrived at the palace door while circling around Qin Changsheng. A step to saint stage, what a terrifying level that is. Qin Changsheng, who didn't even enter purification and even Zhuang Huanyu, whose rank 10th of the honor roll of Green Cloud, couldn't even stand up firmly in front of Xiao Songgong's pressure. The difference of stage didn't matter. What mattered was the natural strength of a powerful Xiaxingist. Everyone thought Qin Changsheng would kneel on the floor the next moment. No one believed that no reaction would come out of him besides the fact that his expression got heavier. Qin Changsheng just endured the terrifying pressure from that black mighty dragon earlier in the underground. Even the might of a dragon couldn't make him kneel, so how will Xiao Songgong's pressure do so? Even if the elder of Mountain Li's sword sect is powerful, how would he compare to the Black Dragon? Tang 36 didn't know about this situation and felt that terrifying pressure. He was a little worried and pushed aside the guards circling around and stared at Xiao Zonggong while yelling, "Is the elder going to bully a child?" Luo Luo stood in front of Qin Chongsheng. Because of this she personally felt the powerful pressure and knew she wasn't an opponent against Xiao Zonggong. Although she always thought Qin Chongsheng was hiding her strength and should be able to counter this level of attack, she still got angry. This guy dared to put pressure on her master. She yelled furiously, "You stupid short log. You want to bully people just because you are old." The palace fell into silence once again. Everyone was shocked. They were shocked that they heard something so unbelievable. Xiao Songgong was surprised as well. Someone dared to yell at him. The young men of Mountain Li stood at and glanced coldly at the direction of the door. Guan Fei Bai's was expressionless and prepared to fight. If the emperor was shamed, then his officials should fight until death. If one's master was shamed, how should his apprentice react? Just at a close moment like this, the bishop opened his eyes once again. With sleepiness, he looked at the warring two sides and sighed, "You guys are not children anymore. The side who's louder isn't the side with reason. The thing we should do right now isn't to look at the marriage vow that this young fellow spoke of." This sentence was just like the last sentence of his, it was undisputable. From the moment Qin Chongsheng stepped into the palace until now, no one asked to look at the marriage vow that he mentioned. Everyone in the palace wanted to express their attitude and had no trust in Qin Chongsheng's words. However, they all knew that checking the marriage vow is the first thing that should be done. The bishop wanted to check the marriage vow, which showed that he was ready to believe Qin Chongsheng. Thinking about his previous protection of Qin Chongsheng and the resurrection of Tradition Academy earlier this year and the recent turmoils in the capital, people finally realized that he had a background in the Tradition Academy. They shamed the elder of my sect. Would I just let it go? Guan Fei Bai spoke coldly. The bishop smiled tiredly and said, "First we should finish this marriage business. Then you and that young girl can fight however you want. I promise, no one will stop you." Prince Chen Lu knew Luo Luo's identity. Obviously he wouldn't just let the southern ambassadors fight with her. He spoke up and calmed the ambassadors down while asking Qin Chongsheng, "You said you have the marriage vow as proof. Is the marriage vow currently on you?" "Of course not," Qin Chongsheng said, "although I'm not afraid of the marriage vow getting destroyed because there are copies in Palace Li, I don't want that trouble." Luo Luo took out the marriage vow from her sleeve and handed it to him. Qin Chongsheng handed that marriage vow to the guard and walked towards the inside of the palace. Everyone's eyes were on that marriage vow. Some people did a lot of things so this marriage vow wouldn't appear in front of people of this world. Sadly, they didn't succeed. He looked at Su Shiji and Lady Mou who were on the platform and said, "In fact, I told those people, I was actually here to forfeit the marriage. But if these things didn't happen, this marriage vow should be in the Su mansion right now and hid somewhere that couldn't be found by anyone. But the sad thing is, there is no if and but. This marriage vow seemed to be no different from any other marriage vow of Zhou dynasty. It has clear conditions and meanings. But in fact, this marriage was special because it stated clearly that only the male side could forfeit and the witness was the Pope. Even if there are copies of this marriage vow in Palace Li, no one could destroy this marriage vow either because on this piece of paper, the Pope enchanted his powerful seal. The moment anyone destroys this marriage vow, the seal would also be destroyed. This would be a heavy insult to the Pope. Qin Chongsheng earlier said that after Su Shiji obtained the marriage vow, he would hide it in somewhere that couldn't be found. He didn't say he will rip it into pieces or burn it into ashes. In the several months of time after he came to the capital, Dongyu General's mansion never tried to steal the marriage vow and destroy it because of this reason. This kind of special marriage vow was easy to identify as real or false. The palace was dead silent. For a long time, no one spoke out. The head of family Qiu Shan's face was gloomy and all of the southern ambassadors were angry because they got scammed. Even the students and staffs who joined the Ivy Festival weren't happy. The evolution of this event disregarded everyone's expectations. A beautiful tale that was viewed by the world became a joke. An extra person interrupted the beginning of a destined couple. No one was happy. They looked at Qin Changsheng with complex eyes. Just like this youngster said, there were no ifs and buts. But if time could go back, people would definitely not want to hear what Qin Changsheng had to say. What should they do now? People were confused and they didn't know what to do. The family of Qiu Shan came to propose, but Qin Changsheng took out a marriage vow. The people of South ambassadors instinctively glanced at a certain spot. Go Hanshi was sitting there. The people of the South all looked at him because everyone knew he was wise. Although the elder of Mountain Li was there, the aunt of teaching from Mountain Virgin was there, and even the head of family of Qiu Shan was there, people instinctively placed the hope of solving this problem on him. Even after so much happened, his expression was still calm. He looked at Qin Changsheng with interest and value, not caution and anger. He never spoke. Guan Feibai looked at him and said, "Senior." Go Hanshi stood up and looked at Qin Changsheng. His smile was warm and friendly. We all say that a marriage is of the wish from the parents and the words of the matchmaker. You have the marriage in your hand and therefore you have the words. But the wish of the parents is on our side, but... Just when everyone thought this genius of Mountain Li who was known for his wisdom was about to debate with Qin Changsheng, he suddenly switched his tone and said seriously, "But these are not important because the ones who are entering marriage is not the parent nor the matchmaker, but the bride and groom. The world knew that my senior and sister Su knew each other when they were young and the relationship between them is unbreakable. Even if the marriage vow in your hand is real, should my sister of teaching just marry to you like this?" After finishing his sentence, everyone in the palace all nodded. Su Yurong is the most beautiful pearl in Zhou dynasty. Should she marry to a person just because that guy has a marriage vow in his hand? Wouldn't it just be dropping a pearl into the dirt? Would the Pope agree to something like this to happen? Even if the marriage vow is real, if she wanted to marry Qiu Shanjun, could anyone stop her? Although this view may be illogical, it seemed quite logical after Go Hanshi said it. The people in the palace needed this kind of logic. Go Hanshi looked at Qin Changsheng warmly and said, "If you truly cared about Sister Su, shouldn't you respect her opinion? As a man, you should have this kind of attitude." Although his words seemed warm and generous, it was sharp and dangerous. Qin Changsheng looked at this person and was silent. Everyone in the palace waited for his answer. Just at this moment, a loud cry was heard from the night sky outside of the palace. A white crane landed stylishly. Chapter 67, The White Crane as Proof, Part 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Nothing less was expected from the head of the younger generation of Mountain Li's sword sect. As the second rule who even Qiu Shanjun sought advice from, Go Hanshi's words were difficult to respond to. Why? Because his words were in the gray territory of logical-nillogical, it was understood and felt by everyone. Qin Changsheng was silent for a moment, but he was prepared to answer. Just when he was about to open his mouth and was ready to continue even if it meant enduring the mockery from the entire world, he heard a crane's cry from outside of the palace. A crane's cry. This crane's cry was strong and firm. A white crane slashed through the night. Its body consisted entirely of white feathers and it landed on the floor of the palace as if it was a piece of snowflake. Its thin neck was turned slightly and its expression was cold and prideful. A lot of people in the field, for example, Su Shiji knew this crane. His face turned even gloomier. The ant and the disciplines of Mountain Virgin became a little nervous. Go Hanshi and other disciplines of Mountain Li had seen this white crane outside of their senior's house couple of times. Qin Changsheng also knew this white crane, but it had been a few years since he last saw it. Looking at this white crane, his mood was a little complex. This white crane came from the south and brought a letter from Su Yurong. Mou read that letter and glanced at the people in the palace. The entire place was silent and she sighed, "Tonight is over." Discussion started in the palace and it was kind of annoying. People were shocked because they didn't know what was in the letter and why Lady Mou announced the end of Ivy Festival. Xiao Songgong asked gloomily, "Can we know the context of this letter?" Mou raised her eyebrows slightly. She obviously supported the proposal from the southern ambassadors, but hearing the words from the elder from Mountain Li made her a little angry. She thought, she wanted to help save some face for them by asking to end the Ivy Festival early. But since they don't know what's good for them, it's all up to them. She handed the letter to Prince Chenlu and didn't bother afterwards. Prince Chenlu read the letter to himself and his expression turned a little funny. Then he started reading the letter in front of the public because it was asked in the letter. The context of this letter was simple. It only consisted of a few lines, but its meaning was clear. Different from anyone's expectations in the palace, although this letter came from the south, it didn't come from Mountain Virgin. Su Yurong wasn't at Mountain Virgin. Instead, she went to Shuxing in the southern sea. If one actually calculated, it would be known that she actually began right before the southern ambassadors started their trip. The tone of Su Yurong's letter was calm. She respected everyone present today and thanked the proposal started by her sect because it represented the care and love of her elders. However, she had a different opinion about this event. Before the end of the first half of this letter, she didn't make clear of anything but many people in the palace understood what she was trying to get at. She didn't know that the southern ambassadors were going to propose in the capital. In other words, the southern sect didn't ask for her opinion before deciding on this event. Many people's faces turned ugly and some were relieved. All in all, there was a wonderful change. True, marriage was based on the wishes of the parents and the words of the matchmaker. The heaven, earth, ruler, parents, and master were above them all and the actual couple had nothing much to do with it. Proposals of ordinary families didn't need the consent of the bride but Su Yurong was no ordinary person, especially when someone had said some certain things not too long ago. People looked at Go Hanshi with complicated expressions. Tang 36 mocked, "Wow, so this is the so-called respect you guys asked for." Go Hanshi previously stated that Chen Chongsheng should respect Su Yurong's opinion and that he should have the attitude suitable for a man. But the southern sect sent people to the capital to propose while never asking for Su Yurong's opinion. Was this respectful? Go Hanshi was silent. He didn't knew that Sister Su never knew about the proposal. He didn't understand what the elders on Mountain Virgin were thinking. The thing that he didn't understand the most was why Sister Su sent the white crane to deliver such a letter. Did she really not want to marry his senior? No, this shouldn't be it. He wanted to know what the second half of the letter consisted of. Many people in the palace had the same thought. They all stared at the thin piece of paper in Prince Chenlu's hand. In the second half of this letter, Su Yurong didn't express a trace of anger or hatred. Just like what she previously said, her elders and parents were setting her up in a marriage. No matter how it was observed, it should be understood as love and care. She's the reincarnation of the true phoenix. She's the only candidate for the next virgin of the southern sect. She had the talent that was admired and respected by countless people. She could have more freedom and hold more respect. So in response to Go Hanshi's words, she didn't even know about the proposal. Even before she actually grew and developed completely, she was the daughter of Dongyu General's mansion and a discipline of Mountain Virgin. She could speak her opinions against her family and sect but in front of the world, her attitude must remain calm and respectful. The entire world saw her as this flawless girl. Of course, everyone thought she liked Qiu Shanjun as well and thought this was the reason for her calmness. In the second half of the letter, she directly told everyone that they thought wrong. In the letter, Su Yurong clearly stated that the only relationship between her and Qiu Shanjun was that they disciplines of the same sect and close siblings. She respected her senior, but never wanted to be together with him. She also wrote in the letter that she didn't know if this letter would arrive on time. However, no matter late or on time, she stood by her decision that she would not marry to him. In just a few dozens of lines, she expressed her thought clearly, but it lacked explanations. The people in the palace all looked at the letter in Prince Qianlu's hand. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. Why? Why is this happening? Why is she so calm? So sure? This marriage was the bond between the southern sect and Zhou dynasty. It was the will of the divine queen, the pope, the virgin, and Mountain Li's sword sect. In front of this enormous will, what reason did she have to object? Su Yurong used the last sentence of the letter to give an explanation to the entire continent. This explanation was simple, yet undisputable. It was similar to Qin Chongsheng's explanation of objecting Qiu Shanjun's proposal. Because I'm already in a vow to be married. My fiancé is Qin Chongsheng. Silence filled the palace. Not a sound was heard. Previously, no one trusted Qin Chongsheng's words. Even if his marriage vow was real, no one accepted this fact until the White Crane bought this letter and revealed Su Yurong's true feelings. This letter was like a slap to the face for everyone. Mou previously read this letter and thought to herself, what does this idiot girl want to do? Luo's eyes were sparkling and she praised, Su Yurong is so cool. Qin Chongsheng lowered his head slightly and saw his reflection on the golden bricks in the palace. Previously when Prince Qianlu was reading the letter, his expression got calmer and calmer as the sentences went on. The pressure was lifted from his heart. But why in the end did confusion fill his heart? Why did you write a letter like this even if you don't want to marry me? Qin Chongsheng thought. Just this moment, the White Crane walked up to Qin Chongsheng and extended its neck to greet him warmly. Qin Chongsheng raised his head and smiled at the White Crane. He raised his arm, wrapped around its neck and patted its head. Looking at this scene, the people in the palace fell into a deeper silence. Everyone knew that this White Crane always followed Su Yurong around when it was not delivering messages. Its personality was cold and prideful, but right now, it was so close with Qin Chongsheng. This meant that Qin Chongsheng knew the White Crane from way back. He was already so close with the crane, what more could be said about the girl? So everything said in the letter was true and not an excuse. Su Yurong wasn't forced to follow her grandfather's will but accepted this marriage as her wish. Perhaps she and this youngster named Qin Chongsheng were actually childhood friends. Childhood friends. Unbreakable as gold. Tang 36 looked at Go Hanshi and the southern ambassadors. Those were words that Go Hanshi previously used to describe the relationship between Qiu Shanjun and Su Yurong. Tang 36's smile may seem indifferent, but mockery and insult was hiding within. From what I see, isn't this just wishful thinking? Translator note. Just in case readers forgot, it was mentioned very early in the story that Su Yurong's grandfather was ill and Qin Chongsheng's master cured him. To thank his work, Su Yurong's grandfather made a vow to marry Su Yurong to the master's apprentice. Chapter 68, The White Emperor as Last Name, Part 1, You are listening at novelfull.audio. They had been killing birds daily, but today, a bird pecked their eyes or better yet, slapped their faces. This sentence did not exactly correspond to what happened tonight, but after seeing Su Yurong's letter and hearing Tang 36's words, many people had this feeling. They felt that their faces were burning with embarrassment. Su Shiji's face looked very mad, of course. Since the beginning of the Ivy Festival today, his face had always been looking mad. Far away, he stared at Qin Chongsheng with fire burning in his eyes. In order to retain the reputation of Su Mansion, in order to retain the Divine Queen's trust, he had to do something immediately. Even though this was the royal palace, he still wanted to kill Qin Chongsheng. The engagement, White Crane and Elders would mean nothing if the youngster was dead. Among the soldiers surrounding Qin Changsheng and Luo Luo, there was his most loyal subordinate, the so-called man of sacrifice. The man held a knife tightly. His face was just as blank as his comrades, but secretly, he stared at the back of Qin Changsheng's neck. To avoid being noticed by others, his look wasn't cold but it was very attentive. Once Ze Tian Ji narrowed his eyes to give the signal, Qin Changsheng's neck will be chopped off by the swift knife. But this bloody scene didn't happen because when Ze Tian Ji was thinking of giving out the signal, two cold looks fell on his body. One came from the bishop of the Department of Traditional Education, who always closed his eyes. He seemed to be a sleepy elder, but he had wise words to say at key moments, and simply opening up his eyes, which was an extremely simple action, faster than raising a hand and taking out knife, was enough to dissuade further action. Another look came from an unexpected person, Mou. Ze Tian Ji's emotion was changing. After all, he did not do anything. If it was only a warning from the bishop, he probably would still make an attempt, but Mou's look made it very difficult to decide. The temperament in the palace was extremely tense now and also extremely embarrassing. The palace was extremely quiet. After Tang 36 spoke those words, he angered the southerners, but they didn't know how to reply. At this moment, a voice came up from somewhere in the seats at the end of the banquet. Of course we should respect the elders' will, but the connection through marriage between the South and North is such a significant move. In order to fight against the demons, it's definitely fine for individuals to make a sacrifice. Looking at where the person who spoke this sat, one could see that he was just an ordinary student who passed the preliminary exam to the great trial. No one knew why he said this, but he probably said it because he was just a pedantic young man who cared about the future of humankind. After speaking this, the entire palace was silent, even more quiet than before. Everyone remained wordless. They were not using silence to show their objection. They obviously knew these words actually were unreasonable at all, but it was their last hope for this engagement to succeed, so they all remained silent to keep themselves out of affair. They let the youngster who said these words to stand in the front. Qin Changsheng looked towards the youngster. Seeing the youngster's serious attitude and knowing that he really thought this way made Qin Changsheng sad rather than angry. He was ashamed how the first emperor led the union of the Yao and human army to force the demons back to Shuelao city, but humans still couldn't get rid of their fears of demons. Humans are truly shameless. Another voice came up in this quiet palace. This sentence seemed normal, but it was actually spoken by a person of a very high position or by a very bitter other side. Commenting on the entire human world caused the people to be even more furious than before because they could not even object to it. This marriage, since the very beginning, was a great event in the human world. When the Southerners came to propose and did not tell Su Rong, the South and the great Zhou court could push the blame onto her parents if any problems occurred later on. When Qin Changsheng suddenly appeared with an engagement, people then decided to respect Su Rong's own opinion, but when the white crane flew brought a letter to reveal Su Rong's true feelings, someone stood up to argue that individuals should sacrifice for the benefit of the entire human race. When you talk about promises, they talk about feelings. When you talk about feelings, they switch the topic and talk about morals. When you talk about morals, they then talk about reasons. In short, when they can't argue against you and when they don't have anything to back them up, they will change the topic. They will keep changing the topic until the situation is favorable for them and until they emerge as the victors. This was truly shameless. It was Luo Luo who took down the masks and uncovered everyone's shameless faces under the light of the nightly pearls. She did not hide her contempt and anger. She looked at the people in the palace and said, "Do you even care about honor at all?" The Southerners sitting in the front seats could no longer hold their anger. Guan Fei Bai, who had held it in for so long, suddenly stood up and said, "Don't you dare." Luo Luo glimpsed at him and wanted to curse back, but after thinking about Qin Changsheng, she held herself back. Instead, she murmured to herself. Qin Changsheng rubbed her head, laughed and said, "There's no point in arguing with these people." Tang 36 shook his head, said, since we want to fight, we can't lose in the verbal combat. Chen Chongqing thought a bit and said, true, but I am not good at this. If you want to learn, let me teach you. Tang 36 looked at him said. He then turned around and looked at where the southern ambassadors were sitting. His vision fell on Guan Fei Bai and he scolded, I am talking to you guys. Even a little girl knows that you are shameless, how can you not feel that yourself? Don't you dare. Don't your mom dare. Guan Fei Bai was furious to the max degree and his look matched his anger. At this moment, the white crane lightly used its beak to touch Chen Chongqing's hand. Chen Chongqing felt a bit surprised. He looked at the crane and although he hadn't seen it for many years already, he faintly understood its meaning. He thought a little and since he had already achieved the goal tonight, he figured that he should leave early to avoid further embarrassing the other people. Let's leave. He told Luo Luo and Tang 36. Leave. The elder of the mountain Li Xiao Song Gong looked at them and said coldly, you three little kids, you think you can just leave like this? Hearing this, Luo Luo slightly raised her thin eyebrows. Chen Chongqing's desire to take her and Tang 36 away was simply giving the southern ambassadors a step down, but in others' view, they were giving in first which made she feel uneasy. Now that the opponents seemed unwilling step down, how would she still give in? You old son of a bitch, do you actually dare to stop us from leaving? Elder Xiao Song Gong suddenly became mad. Every one of his wrinkles began to emit dangerous aura. He was only one step away from Saint and the first moment he noticed Luo Luo, he faintly knew that she wasn't a human. Because of one thing happened in past, he disliked people of the Yao race. More accurately speaking, he detested Yao. He was the elder of the Li Mountain. How would he care about such a weak Yao? What's going to happen even if he killed her? Xiao Song Gong said coldly, you were so disrespectful to me before, so I'm going to help your parents to teach you a lesson. Hearing the words parents, Luo Luo raised her eyebrows and said with slight anger, who do you think you are? How dare you say this? At the first night of the Ivy Festival, she almost said the exactly same words to the professor of the Heavenly Academy. On the third night, she spoke this again but Xiao Song Gong was the elder of Li Palace. He was far more respectable than the professor of Heavenly Academy, but in her eyes, what's the difference between them? Xiao Song Gong originally thought that after all, he was in the royal palace. He had to save some reputation for the Zhou people. It would especially be a problem if he bothered the divine queen, but tonight he got humiliated continuously, especially by this little girl who didn't respect him at all. He just couldn't control his temper anymore. The light emitting from the nightly pearls was flashing. Elder Xiao Song Gong still stayed at the same place, his sword was still in its sheath, but an extremely sharp sword spirit already came out of the sheath and dived towards Luo Luo. Although on the first night, Luo Luo already demonstrated her strength, she was only a young little girl. It was even impossible for Qiu Shanjun to defeat Xiao Song Gong who was only one step away from Saint, facing such strong sword spirit. How could she defend against it? Obviously Xiao Song Gong still had his worries, so the sword spirit was mild. It should not kill Luo Luo, but it would definitely hurt her. Only by doing so, he could release his anger and teach the youngsters a deep lesson. He thought he was tolerant enough, but he didn't think that there were some people whom he couldn't even hurt. No, Prince Chen Lu's face turned pale as he shouted urgently. Mou's willow eyebrows lifted up and yelled, stop. Xiao Song Gong's stage was truly high. They couldn't even stop him and only hoped that he would listen their voices, and make a pause on the brink of his attack. In the palace, the only one who was as strong as Xiao Song Gong was the principal of the Heavenly Academy, Mao Qiuyu. Only he could block Xiao Song Gong's attack. Mao Qiuyu stared at the sword spirit that was breaking air and his eyes were like God's eyes, there were smoke and rain inside. Prince Chen Lu, Mou, and Mao Qiuyu were the ones who reacted fastest but they were not the first one to react. The one who reacted first was Chen Chongqing. No one noticed when he stood in front of Luo Luo. Just like that night and also like the other night. Since Luo Luo became his apprentice, he really saw Luo Luo as his own student, and wanted to protect her. This is his duty. It became an instinct. Chen Changsheng appeared in front of the sharp sword spirit. Xiao Songgong looked at him expressionless. Since he could not kill anyone in the Great Zhou royal palace, heavily wounding Chen Changsheng would be even better. If he destroyed this youngster, would Su Yurong still marry him later? Of course, if this youngster was unlucky and died, that might be the best thing. Mao Qiu already prepared to do something. He lifted his two sleeves as if he was about to dance in wind. Yet the next moment, his sleeves suddenly stopped moving. Not because he wanted to watch Chen Changsheng die, but because someone already did something. A shadow suddenly flew onto the field from the corner of the palace. The shadow was unimaginably fast, as fierce as fire. It caused a harsh sound in the air. Chapter 69, The White Emperor as Last Name, Part 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. The sword spirit is an invisible sword. This sword began from the depths of the palace and thrusted its way all the way towards the palace door. Elder of Mountainly used his past experience, and whether or not the sword was visible or invisible, it would be chopped into half by this sword. No matter if Luo Luo or Chen Changsheng placed the sword horizontally in front of his chest, no one could defend against this sword. Something or someone broke the air. Like lightning, a shadow came before the sword. Pa, the seemingly unstoppable sword spirit from Xiao Songgong was actually blocked. More shockingly, what blocked this sword spirit was simply a pair of hands. The hands were shrouded by the sword's light, which emitted a golden color like it was made of actual gold. A complete silence. Elder Xiao Songgong's sword spirit and the hands interacted, pa. Next moment, in the darkness outside the Wei Yang Palace, the pa sounds came up again. The sword and hands were motionless in people's eyes, but the surrounding air was about to break. The darkness outside seemed to have broken already. Hong. The barrier outside the Wei Yang Palace suddenly broke up. Cold wind blew in from all the doors and windows. It blew up teachers' and students' robes, and even the light emitted from the night pearls seemed to be shaking. Some who were close to the door were even falling backwards. Their faces were pale as they couldn't breathe and obviously, couldn't make any sounds. Such a strong chi crash paved way for terrifying consequences. It was still dead silent in the palace. There was only sound of wind blowing. The sword spirit gradually diminished. The hands were slowly taken back. The owner of the hands was only an ordinary-looking middle-aged man. The man looked a bit fat and he wore clothes with copper coins all over it. He looked like a common rich man in the countryside, but he didn't look like an elite at all. He therefore, appeared extraordinarily unfitting in the palace. The middle-aged man took his hands back and looked at Xiao Songgong in the depth of the palace. He revealed a meaningful smile and then retreated to Luo Luo's back. When he stood in front of Luo Luo, he looked like a normal rich man. After he stood behind Luo Luo, he also looked like a normal rich man. He did not reveal any manner as an elite, and he neither tried to hide his aura nor pretended to be a butler. Because he, currently, was just an ordinary rich man. He only loved money, especially gold. However, people wouldn't believe so. They looked at the man shocked and confused. A man who could tie with the elder of Mountainly Xiao Songgong, at the very least should be at the same level with the principal of the Heavenly Academy. How could he be a regular rich man? The southern ambassadors felt even more shocked, especially the young disciples of Mountainly. They couldn't understand that even though their granduncle casually attacked and controlled his power because he was in the Great Zhou royal palace, how could this man block the sword simply by using a pair of hands? Xiao Songgong looked at the middle-aged man standing by the door and had mixed feelings. He remembered something, but dared not to believe it. An extremely soft breaking sound came up. This sound was so light that only the disciples who stood closest to Xiao Song Gong could hear it. Furthermore, only they could see clearly that on the sheath tied to Elder Xiao Song Gong's waist, a fragment appeared. As disciples of Li Mountain, how could they not understand what it represented? It was not a draw. The seemingly ordinary middle-aged man actually defeated Elder Xiao Song Gong. The palace was very quiet. Everyone's look fell on the ordinary man who was standing behind Luo Luo. Su Shiji was so mad that his face turned green. He also felt so shocked. He knew that the female student of the Tradition Academy, Luo Luo, had an uncommon background, but he never expected that she actually had subordinates with such terrifying strength. Who was that middle-aged man? Who is this little girl named Luo Luo? The rope on Xiao Song Gong's bony body slowly moved because wind was blowing it up. His hands were also trembling slightly in his sleeves. The previous fight ended very quickly. It seemed like there was no win or lose, but he knew he lost. He was injured, his vessels were harmed, and his chi was spilling out. But what really shocked him wasn't the man's strength, but something that he faintly recalled, someone. Something in the past, someone in the past. Xiao Song Gong looked at the middle-aged man, squinted. He was still uncertain, but he asked, "You are?" The middle-aged man who stood behind Luo Luo coughed. It can be seen that he was also injured from the previous fight. The cough was very soft, but it was like a thunderstrike in Xiao Song Gong's ears. The middle-aged man said, "Yes, it's me." Xiao Song Gong's emotion suddenly changed. His old cheek became as pale as snow and infinite anger appeared in his eyes. He could not hide his fear in the depth. "Jin Yu Lu. How are you here?" Xiao Song Gong's angry and resentful shout echoed in the Wei Yang Palace. Besides it, there weren't any sounds. Everyone was dumbfounded. They looked on the middle-aged man and no longer contained confusion but instead only contained shock, respect and fear. Go Han Shi, Guan Fei Bai, and other direct disciples all had heard of their granduncle's biggest resentment. Now they all looked at the middle-aged man with a complex feeling. Even a person as arrogant and cold as Tang 36 was surprised after hearing the name Jin Yu Lu. His eyes opened up widely as if he wanted to make sure if he was seeing the real person. Chen Changxing knew this middle-aged man. He only knew that this man was more of Luo Luo's butler. The daily foods delivered from the herb garden were also arranged by this man. Chen Changxing had a few talks with this man before but did not see anything special. He only felt that this middle-aged man was very annoying, like a climacteric middle-aged woman. The middle-aged man was the official Jin in the herb garden. How could Chen Changxing have thought that this butler who was like a middle-aged woman would be such a strong man? However, he had never heard of the name Jin Yu Lu, so he couldn't understand the silence and the weird looks on people's faces. Jin Yu Lu was one of the legends in this continent. During that era, when humans and Yao united to fight against the demons, he was the Hei officer 3 times. Being the Hei officer was extremely important because if he messed up, then unimaginable consequence might occur. When he said he would deliver the army provisions and weapons to where and when, then he would definitely make it. There were never any accidents. Because he stood by his words. Anyone who doubted his decision would die in the north. Jin Yu Lu, the head of the 4 generals of Yao. The first emperor of the great Zhou once praised. His words are the equivalent to gold. In Chinese, it was supposed to be Jin Kuyu Lu. The author put his name in this idiom. The principal of Heavenly Academy, Mao Qiu Yu sighed, stood up. Prince Chen Lu felt helpless and stood up. Mou felt a headache and rubbed the center of her eyebrows. She also stood up. Based on Jin Yu Lu's accomplishment and personality, they obviously had to stand up to pay respect. They had to stand up first because Jin Yu Lu revealed his identity. Their action set a precedent for the others in the palace to follow. The Ivy Festival tonight would definitely be recorded in history. After a while, the rest of people also reacted. Their eyes moved from Jin Yulu to the little girl in front of him. The eyes moved very slowly because they were so heavy. The southern ambassadors' faces turned pale. Guan Fei Bai felt so unwilling and reluctant that even his breath got heavy. Go Hanshi's expression became serious, thinking that she was actually in the capital. At the seats of Heavenly Academy, Zhuang Huanyu slowly stood up. His eyes were filled with pain. He couldn't even stand up straight, as if he had lost part of his soul. Since the first night of the Ivy Festival, many people had been guessing the identity of the little girl. People only knew she had an uncommon background, but no one could guess correctly. Accurately speaking, no one dared to guess in that direction. Tonight, Jin Yulu stood quietly behind the little girl. It was easy now for the people to know her true identity. Tang 36 looked at Luo Luo with a complex feeling as he was thinking of something. A complete silence. No one said anything. There had to be someone to break this silence. Chen Changsheng turned and looked at Luo Luo quietly. Luo Luo looked down, mumbled, "Master, I didn't mean to lie to you." In the Tradition Academy she had said, as long as Chen Changsheng asked, she would definitely say it. Chen Changsheng didn't ask. Now, he didn't need to ask. But something seemed to be absent. Chen Changsheng looked at little girl's nervous look, laughed and asked softly, "Who are you?" She thought and said, "I am Luo Luo." Chen Changsheng said seriously, "This is not a bad thing. This is something to be proud of." "Yes, master." Luo Luo looked up, staring at the people in the palace. She stepped up calmly. She was only an ordinary little girl wearing a school uniform who looked pretty but a little immature. Yet as she walked one step forward, she stood in front of the entire world. She stood in front of everyone. Her school uniform looked as if it transformed into the royal robe. A noble aura was emitting out from her. Everyone felt the world was lit up. The entire palace seemed to be actually brighter. This was the real noble aura. People subconsciously avoided to look at her eyes. Some even took many steps back. Not because of fear, but because she was shining. Benoel dem, she was like a rising sun. Calm but warm, but people had to keep enough respect and stay away enough distance from her. She looked at people and said calmly and proudly, "My last name is White Emperor." The White Emperor's last name. Yao realm ranged tens of thousands of miles in the west. In the depths of the realm, there was a big city located on the origin of the Forgotten River. The city was very lofty and the Red River of 800 miles was flowing around the city. The city was named the City of White Emperor because the White Emperor lived there. She was the sole daughter of the current White Emperor. The two sides of the Red River of 800 miles were all her territory. She was Luo Luo. She was Princess Luo Luo.